Thank you for the possibility to participate in your event, and I am very glad to meet your so interesting team, scientific community. For me, it is not easy to get into resonance with your interests because these interests are quite divergent. But
Yes.
I'll try to offer some stuff for your reasoning. It may be, it will be, some of you finds it interesting in some respect too.
I'm sure we will, Olga. It is every attempt. I want to highlight this. This is an interesting era, and this is an interesting topic, and this is a very opportunistic, if you wish, attempt that we're trying to do here. We're trying to essentially create an interdisciplinary way of understanding the world around us. And there are so many bridges and barriers that we need to overcome in order to be able to communicate from different fields. I understand the excitement of all of us that we might have to share, every detail from our field, because we think it's important for the topic of the discussion. But also we need to be able to communicate this with people from different fields. As a general comment, and this is always difficult. I was trying to cut so many slides from my presentation as well, thinking, oh yeah, I need to say this, but All right, Olga, thank you so much for having you here. Thank you for sharing your time. Please, it's all you.
I think the COVID itself does not create any specific formative challenges, but it may be useful as far as it visualizes some force lines of invisible social fields. And it is necessary for theorists to use such visualization in order to determine the poles of the struggling forces in these fields, which are now in a process of large-scale and often unclear transformation. The education field now is one of the most exponents in this sense. That is why I'll talk about it. What is education system in the modern world? First of all, it is the module of the science reproduction, and nothing else. But science is the formative factor of modern European culture, the only legitimate form of knowledge production in it. As Soviet philosopher Mikhail Petrov wrote, all adults of the living generation are involved in the affairs of science as its consumers and representatives. Everyone lives in the direct presence of a faceless, amorphous, unobtrusive, but together with that omniscient, omnipotent, and even all-blessing spirit or ether of science, capable and even obliged upon first demand to thicken and materialize into a very concrete and bodily figure, a doctor, civil engineer, consultant, expert, referent, and so on. This determines, I'm sorry, I had to show it before. This determines the form of the educational module. That is why let's start with what is reproduced, what science is, and get ready for a doubling of it in itself. It is generally accepted that science is the same in all of Europe and is demarked by Popperian criteria. Petrov shares this view and adds sociological explanation of science character by its function in the cultural reproduction. The social purpose of science is to provide industrial replication of knowledge results. This namely is a technological application. That is why science, in its form, is essential. At the entrance, science is creativity. At the output, it is a reproduction. Therefore, the form of its result, natural law, contains a ban on the positing of subjectivity. So it is an objectification and assumes the uniqueness of the subject cogito in Cartesian manner. Popperian science requires for its reproduction a quite specific education for its personnel. And in countries where science was institutionalized in the middle of 19th century, there was a shift in the education system, which Petrov called silent cultural revolution. Its content was the crowding out from the universities of classical personnel, well-rounded, comprehensively educated intellectuals, by disciplinary scientists from Baas organization. To make it visible, Petrov introduced a special tool, the concept of the national scientific T-continuum. T means thesaurus. The continuum is the totality of all communication acts relating in such a way that the difference T1, T0 is passable by the interlocutor, providing mutual understanding. This allows us to visualize what has happened in the revolution with the help of a scheme that combines two processes. First, the transmission of discoveries from the leading edge of discoveries to the beginning of infant education. And the second, the transition of maturing individuals to the terminals of adult activity, including the leading edge of discoveries. Both will be expressed by the difference T1 and T0. And now we see a critical branching point appears here, namely point TU. It marks a universal thesaurus of a high school graduate trained in the basics of disciplined science. Petrov believed that TU, as the highest threshold for common understanding, supplanted the TI thesaurus of classical educated intellectuals. What is the difference? In the state of TI, all representatives of the educated public understand everyone, but in TU there arises a corridor situation. When scientists of different disciplines speak different languages and understand each other only while they communicate at the level of school graduates. TI was the situation when, for example, theologian George Berkeley could aptly criticize the differential calculus of Newton, the leading edge of discoveries of those times. For Petrov, it was a great past, but past of science, and that's the fee for the application. Popperian science requires this educational module for its reproduction. The TU continuum, like a pivot in a cut, has to connect both theory and application. This Petrov considered as a model of society scientification, which was universal for any country in Europe. In this model, science is not related to the nation state. If it were not for interstate competition, a state without science would only better. Because science is innovative, it undermines the social ritual, and science not only could do without the state, but its productive core always lives in the informal communication of invisible colleges. Only the lack of funds forces scientists to go to this mesalliance. Meanwhile, if Popperian science is the only modality of the science, then the scheme of the T-continuum reveals surprisingly the impossibility of science reproduction in two respects. First, the ban on the scientific knowledge of subjectivity. It requires a productive subjectivity, but cannot have it as its result. So it cannot reproduce its own premises, that is, demonstrates its non-self-sufficiency and the need to be complemented by a wider context, only within which it could be reproduced. If this sort of science pretends to be the complete and exclusive definition of science, it makes a scholastic fallacy, as Bourdieu called it, and degenerates into the perverted form of this richer ground. And second reason, blocking the bidirectional movement in the continuum from both ends, undermining the creative synthesis, natural and human certainty at the leading edge of discoveries, and raising a human size problem for students. No one pupil up to you can absorb all the socially necessary accumulated knowledge because it is obtained in the corridor situation in a non-organic fragmented form. Thus, if science is instantly the only legitimate knowledge in the modern European culture, then this knowledge is not the Popperian science. So we need to discern two meanings of the word science. Let us call the wider one full science. But if the perverted form of genuine science is Popperian, then what should be the prototype look like? This was already known to German classical philosophy, which justified completely different normativity for scientific cognition, which can be called Wissenschaft after Fichte Hegel vector. Through their efforts, the scientific form, from a common starting point, cogito, was able to develop two more phases, transcendental apperception from Kant and conceptual form. All three hypostases represent the sequential unfolding of constructing human subjectivity within European culture, on the complexity of which the methodological power of corresponding theory depended. So, without the discovery of transcendental subjectivity, there would have been no revolution in natural science at the turn of the 19th, 20th centuries. Without substantiation in Hegelian logic, science of logic, of a conceptual form that allows us to produce subjectivity, the I, theoretically. Without this, the claim to comprehend the teleology, that is self-organization of nature, by Ilya Prigozhin, and the task of objectifying objectification in sociology by Bourdieu or Elias would not arise in the 20th century. Both claims aspire by means of science to achieve the positing subjectivity. But if it is so, what is this reduction caused by? Reduction to the Popperian science, all science to the Popperian science. Research by Norbert Elias and Pierre Bourdieu provides guidelines for understanding. Bourdieu showed that the objectifying conceptual framework of the science, the lone cogito and its object, is an instrument of domination. Elias's studies help to understand that the institutionalization of the science occurs primarily in the English national linguistic continuum because of the expansion of Britain as a colonial power in the process of forming a single world market, which is absolutely necessary for functioning of industrial production even nationally. The tension between the expansive dominant culture, civilization, and the rest of the multiple cultures underlies the difference between the logics of their world positing, unifying cogito science, and the logic of counteracting expansion and unification, which is built as a pluralistic and, thanks to this, open to the full form of science whose method allow to reckon with the subjectivity of the cognized. So, in different national T-continua, a full science always embraces two different modalities of science. The science relevant to the interests of the dominance and the form illegitimate for it, Wissenschaft modality. They form two necessary poles of scientific field. And second, a full science exists only under the conditions of a pluriversum of national T-continua. But for many T-continua to exist, they need protection from the state, just as it is necessary for local industries in general. The latter was shown by Karl Polanyi. In the absence of the state protection, the imposition of Popperian science standards means a direct expansion of the global market and its leader, and causes a ban on the reproduction of scientific practices of all the rest cultural loci. In this regard, the homology with market practices is complete. The mechanism of direct market expansion is Popperian science-oriented scientometry. As a result of processes of this kind, national languages today as languages of science are in question. But the suppression of national T-continua also leads to the suppression of full science, which is possible only in the pluriversum. For the education system, this implies the need to protect and reproduce TI habitus, without which TU is unproductive. And this means not so much training in the principles of separate sciences. It can just be brought to the last specialized university or postgraduate phases, but looking for ways to the classics for the masses. It is a quite new task in our time, and salvation this task may be philosophy as school of thinking first of all. The best institution for it is still the conjunction classical gymnasium Humboldt University. The very meaning of the Humboldtian combination of teaching and research was the organization of training as a theoretically verified practice of educational cultivation of subjectivity, the exact opposition of Popperian science prohibition. Thanks to classical background, this educational model, even when disciplinary came, continued to produce intellectuals who, if necessary, were able to work on scientific tasks in both modes, comprehensive and creative TI and specialized TU. As we can see on the German example, the existence of the classical paradigm and metaphysical education does not exclude but makes productive the development of technologically relevant and lucrative projects, but they are the final link in the reproduction sequence and cannot appear separately from it. Meanwhile, today, everywhere states, in order to make science more effective, are pursuing a policy that is directly opposite to the logic of the science survival. States support only what fits into a single global science standard, the institutional criterion of which is the level of citation index, which is formed in the impersonal automatic pricing process, actually pricing market. This means just leaving science unprotected. Efforts are directed to ensure that all science, as if in the interest of minimizing communication barriers, speaks one language, English. And education system reflects this tendency. Normally, the education system functions as an antiphysis of the bureaucratic state and legitimate occupation key society positions. That is why it presupposes an access for the lower classes, at least formal access for the lower classes to higher education field, although through the struggle inside this field. The upper classes tend to drive out the lower classes from the field, and it deforms normal function of antiphysis. The last time shows the ways of this deformation. This is, first, to give the lower classes access to socially necessary knowledge only as users of imposed schemes. That is, does not give access to change its forms, to creativity. It means intensification of TU implementing. New educational standards work for this. And second, to cut off social contacts that can increase the social power of the student. The ideal tool for this, which COVID pushed, is distance learning for the masses, distance learning for the masses. I have shown that science has with skids, because creativity cannot be distributed according to the model of subject-object opposition. With such dispositions, only common sense will remain at the upper pole. In this pole, all creativity degenerates into flat erudition. As Hegel wrote, the spirit is forced to augment the extant collection of mummies and the general heap of contingent oddities, for the spirit itself slipped away between the fingers of the curious collector of information. The described tendency is directed towards the blocking science-intensive production, exactly to the extent that the creative potential is cut off from the lower classes. Hence, to protect the T-continuum, to oppose its monopolization by upper classes and its degeneration, to struggle for the democratization of education system at all levels is maybe the only exit. This is all. Thank you for your attention. Maybe you want to ask something. I hope you know what does it mean, antiphysis. Antiphysis.
I want to ask, actually, that was my first question. Olga.
This is Rabelaisian term which Bourdieu used in his construction. When after the death of king, his son occupies his place, it is physis, it is natural legitimation of this right.
Okay, yes. From the Greek word physis.
Okay. It is a bureaucracy.
Now it makes sense in my head, at least, directly. Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much for this great talk, Olga. So we have plenty of time for questions, and I think questions can be helpful here to to bridge interdisciplinary gaps. So let's use them. I'm sure all of us have questions, so let's go to the audience. Please feel free to ask questions.
I'm very, very much out of my area here, and it's very possible I have misunderstood some of your talk, which is not your fault. My question is, I understand that if we are, there is a lot of evidence which says that if we are all, if you speak on one language, you think in a particular format than if you speak in another language. I mean, there are reasons to suggest this, right? So of course, I would say there is a room to suggest that if we are all just doing English science, then eventually we are kind of normalizing towards some mean, and this richness that comes from different languages will perhaps disappear. But then the problem here is, if we are not, in fact, then how do we understand each other? Don't we run into the risk of repeating work? Instead of building upon each other, we are going to repeat what somebody has done already. Or is that perhaps a feature, not a bug?
I agree with you completely. I'm not neglect or try to neglect the common language, English language too. It is important as a science component of full science too. Appearance science is necessary, but rather as a system of logistic, as a market-like system to convey the ready-made knowledge to the points of its consumption. It is absolutely necessary component of full science. But Popperian science is characterized by the strain to delegitimate Wissenschaft component, but this Wissenschaft component is necessary too. If we will kill this component, absolutely, the whole science, if Popperian science will stop.
Right. But
It
can
will
it
be
sorry,
just.
sorry if I'm taking somebody's time, but can it be argued that since we are in fact not just what we speak, but we do come from different cultures and we have different upbringings, when I approach a problem, I approach it as the person who I am, not just the scientist. I am also an individual with a particular experiences and truths I uphold dear. So I mean, I'm neither agreeing nor disagreeing with you. I don't know what to think about this. I'm just trying to make some kind of a sense. So on one hand, I would say, yes, okay, so what if we repeat the research? Then we do, that is one way to solve the reproducibility crisis, right? If something can be reached by two people more or less at the same time, like it was the case in mathematics quite often before we all kind of consolidated the research in one language. On the other hand, isn't it enough that we are different people if you make science accessible, that anybody can do it, not just this particular color of people with this particular upbringing in this particular corner, right? Would that not serve the purpose?
What,
it's not a question.
What not?
If we make science accessible to people who have aspirations, curiosities, right? Mm-hmm. These people would have different experience. Mm-hmm. Is not that enough to guarantee that this regression to some kind of a mean doesn't happen? So why is it not enough that different people do the science, regardless of which language they speak? And then if they happen to communicate their finding in this particular language, isn't it enough that they are just different people?
I may say that, of course, what I have said, it is hypothetically, but Petrov, with this model, tried to understand, to explain observation of Derek Bisola Price, maybe you have heard this name, quite famous, who noticed that the development of science has changed its character about 80 years of 20th century. Science started as an exponent in rising, yes, exponent. Yeah. But in the middle of the 20th century, it changed into logistic curve.
Right.
This is losing of productivity. Petrov explains with this acceleration of Popperian component of T-continuum as the main tool of education. Right. That is why if you continue, it will guarantee that science as Popperian science will be killed itself.
No, of course, that is a concern, of course, but there are different ways to interpret that same event. So if I'm the devil's advocate here, I would say that in the past, the science, there are two arguments, right? One argument is that right now it takes a lot more effort to produce new results because there is so much more literature that I need to cover before I am able to add to it, right? If I look at these papers in artificial intelligence from the 50s, there are 4 pages, it's a very simple idea, and then there is almost no references, or there's 1 paper or 2 paper in references, and all these people knew each other. So that effort that it took a person to write a paper in the 60s on AI it's not really comparable to the effort that takes a person today to write a paper. It requires a lot more to be ingested before new things can be produced. So if we measure the difference between that idea when there is nothing and the difference between these ideas that are being put forward when there are so many competing ideas, of course, that in the past, that looks like much bigger contribution than what it looks like today. I mean, there is this paradigm in engineering which says that 10% of the problem, the last 10% of the problem require 90% of the effort, right? So I would say this is the situation we are in. The other argument, completely different argument, would be, well, do we really have the case that science is accessible to everybody? Because throughout the 20th century, it was basically you have to be rich enough in order to do academia. It wasn't the case that somebody from, I don't know, in the middle of a large country with no access to a university, in a community that does not, in which nobody has gone to a university, they will even dream about going to university. That person would be discouraged very, very strongly against it. Not to even mention that they wouldn't even have the resources to do it. So the science that up to even today is being done by only one group of people. It's not being done by representatives of humanity, as it were, I would argue. I mean, so we are not really seeing the full potential as it is.
I am not sure that science which is done is done by a small group of people. Because
not small, but the same type of people.
The same type. Yes, I am not going to say that everybody of our people must be scientists in the narrow sense, but everyone must have an access to be. Must have an access. But in how way, in which way this success will be realized, it is another question. But if you cut this excess, this will lead to the stagnation.
Right. No, I do agree about that. Yeah. Thanks for the talk. It was very interesting.
Thank you for the interest.
Other questions? I have one question. Bobby, let's give first to the. Yes.
Hi,
Bobby.
Olga. I liked what you said, but so I said, how can us scientists protect ourselves? Probably just a hypothetical or nice question, but I'll give an instance actually. I don't know if you're aware of the antitrust right now between our big tech giants over here in America, the Amazon, the Google, the who else was it? But anyways, they're the four big tech giants. Google, Amazon. Sorry, I forgot. But anyways, they're debating right with them, and America gave them a military contract, but I think it was Facebook guy, he turned it down. So, and that's why our Congress was saying, while they're accusing them, you're helping Chinese and whatnot, but they're like, that's not real. But anyways, they turned down an American contract or American military contract, and I was just wondering, in a way, I kind of believe that is a way. Would you say scientists are protecting themselves? Well, I mean, I consider the computer science as well, but I was just trying to say, I think you could see that we are, like in America, trying to protect our ideals, but I don't know what was your thought on that? I don't know if it's really a question, but yeah, I'm really for protecting scientists, but yeah, and I do agree it's a privilege to have knowledge and I noticed that, like, you see the unprivileged classes or don't have wealth, that they don't get access to knowledge, and you know, but at the same point, it's, you ask the question, do they even want the knowledge? I mean, I think that's always a big question too. Like, there's people who just, I believe, want to be told what to do, but I mean, I don't know, not everyone, but I think, whether as I'm saying, there are leaders and there's followers. I'm kind of seeing the gist of that some people are okay with being told what to do, but like me, I'm not. Like, I want to question everything, but so that's why I wanted to further seek my education. But I don't know, just, I guess, seeing all these social interactions, yeah, it takes, yeah, a lot of time. But I liked your diagrams a lot. But yeah, sorry if it was not really a question, but I'm just trying to say I agree with you. We should protect our scientists more, and I think it is going on more, like, you know, boycotting the consumption and all this, and like, I could see it, and you know, I hope it just continues, you know. And but no, thank you for the diagrams. They're really explain a lot of detail in your the diagrams, but I'd like to further investigate them. But sorry, I don't know. But yeah, that's all I have to say.
Thank you very much. I must to confess that I didn't catch everything, and the question itself I didn't catch. If you would like, would you like?
I would say, how could we protect our scientists more? Probably that's just a more general. I'd like to say, how could we protect scientists more?
Mm-hmm. How to protect science and scientists? I think that state policy must be of such kind that to protect national language, firstly, yes, to create in the inner space of state inner scientific index. And no, for example, in my country, now the state is pursuing such a policy that the value of scientists depends on his international scientific index. But if the national T-continuum, in which one another understands, for many years works without this exit to the international continuum, this ranging kills national scientists. They cannot, at the moment, cannot gain this high range of international scientific index. And if his university fired him out, it will be legitimate from the point of view of science, but it will lead to the just wasting, just ending the national science at all. That is why I think that national scientific index, national inner market, scientific market must be created earlier than the government will be required from the scientists to correspond to international range, it seems to me. For example, in this way. And I think that it is not fair policy to fire out, to retire the scientists who many years accumulated his intellectual potential, who may teach, impart his legacy to the following generations, to expel him from the university because he doesn't have this international scientific index, or Hirsch, for example, because the main criteria must be content criteria, which may exist when scientists understand one another. They must be in direct, immediate contact through events like this, for example, and so on. And this content must be appreciated, not neglected.
I agree.
Otherwise, national language. Petrov, when he wrote his work, it was about 80s years of 20th century. He wrote about Russian language as a fourth language of science, fourth language after English, French, German, Russian. Now it is not so. Now we are losing it. Our Russian question, language as language of science is under the big question. And maybe not only Russian. That is why I feel the situation.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. No, I agree. Yeah, I like what you're saying, this scientific market though. I mean, that's really a great idea. And you know, and even as learning, I was just over the summer learning how to build my own web page and domain. I mean, specifically that's why they were saying these were designed for scientists to have access to different information, to have files and to send them to each other. So in a way, I think that's like the scientific market, but like what you're saying in your country, yeah, that's wrong. They're totally taking out the light of all these good works from all these scientists, which is wrong. And yeah, I'm saddened by that. I would hope, we could preserve all that, precious material, because I would like to read all that and learn your language or something and read all that. Like, there's so much knowledge to learn, but so little time. But yeah, thank you, Olga. Sorry, that was just a comment.
Thank you, Bourdieu.
May I ask something, Olga? First of all, do we have other? Of course we have, but any other questions right now? So can I ask something myself, please, guys? All right. So yesterday we have a nice discussion at some point where we start discussing how scientific the labor distribution in the past was going hand by hand with the scientific distribution. And today, as we get more and more and more to a more integrated world, to a more interconnected world, maybe the need of a more synthetic science emerges. And one question that I have there, and we briefly discussed yesterday, but I would love to hear your opinion, is that maybe even if we bring the greatest minds today together to try to create the synthetic science that it's needed, maybe this is not even enough. As the integration that's happening is supported by AI, maybe the synthetic science as well needs to be supported by AI. What is your opinion on this? What are your comments?
I think, Thanos, that yes, the key question in this, where the great minds comes from? Where you take these great minds? If we cannot any idea of how they arise.
Yeah, you are bringing the issue of subject.
That is why we need in Wissenschaft who knows how this habitus may be formed. All this habitus, this habitus is formed by human efforts. Yeah. And but Papirian science bans to investigate it. Yeah. That is why the key question. This.
So you don't think there is a technical limitation, or it's a matter of the production of the subject, if I understand well what you're saying, right? It's a problem of the production of the subject.
Yes.
You don't think there is a technical limitation there? So you don't think that AI needs to support such a synthetic science, or it's a required? You're highlighting that the most important right now is I understand this, is the lack of the production of the subject. But do you think that there is also this problem that I am mentioning? Is this an issue, or is this science fiction of computer scientists? Because we like to think big of our field. I want your sincere opinion on this.
I think that these modern sciences are a great thing, and they must be helpful in the process of improving interrelations between people, between human beings, first of all. And I think that the task not to remodel artificial human being. The thinking being will be human being, and for me it is easier to give it birth than to construct it from details.
Yeah.
These details must be helpful in the life of human being. Thinking being is a human being who is birthing and dirty his пачкает пеленки. Just a moment.
We also have, I think, if we have some Russian speaking, Oleg, I see you there.
Yeah, I can help translate actually.
Perfect.
I just joined late, but I wish I would join the beginning. I'm sorry?
This human being, thinking being, is those who is birthed and dirty diapers. He must dirty diapers at the first step of his living. He must be alive being,
Okay.
live, small child.
Yeah. I think I understand what you're saying, but if you find yourself trapped in the terminology, you have some words in Russian in your mind, we can use Oleg's here. Maybe he can help, who is able to translate for some small terminology. This is what I'm saying. So if you want to say something else now, Oleg could help.
It will be great. I hope. Have you understood what I said the last?
Yes, I'm not sure if I completely agree. So I want to ask a follow-up question on this. First of all, let me clarify. You are saying that intelligence can only be human. This is what you're saying pretty much here, or?
And this question concerns also to the morality too, because.
Or living organisms, not human. Yes.
What?
I said I'm trying to capture the essence of what you said more accurately, and I don't think what you said is intelligence is only human, but it's coming of living beings, right?
Living
so
beings.
We need living beings.
Yes.
Yes.
I don't know what you understand under the human. I think that intelligence is a social feature. It does not pertain me as a biological individual. It is a system quality which arises only in the community. Without my belonging to this community, I never will be a thinking human. I became a thinking human only as a representative on my community.
Important aspects that
to think it is and to have a moral consciousness too. It is the same at the limit. It is the same thing. It is a system quality, and it does not depend on some inventions in technical objects.
Mm-hmm.
In order to behave good, I must be creator. There are no rules how to behave in morality at all. At all. You must be creative as an artist when you want to behave good in moral sense.
What about swarm intelligence? What about artificial life? What about building artificial life, building machines that are, have sort of needs, and they are serving those needs and they interact with each other? Do you think that in this context, can we go towards an artificial life direction? And or do you think that it's only of biological entities, that we cannot, this will not even be life? We're not legitimate to even call it artificial life. What do you think?
It is very interesting modeling of life processes, but to achieve a true life instantly, to create a life, it means something like a God's task, or task of author who creates his hero, yes, as autonomous being. In what extent this being is autonomous? If you attain this autonomy, you attain life, not artificial, full life, but artificial means. If not, it is only just a mean for the life. It cannot exist without this more wide context, without this system quality, whose needs, at least, it represents. This is my opinion. And maybe life itself is also might be thought interdependent in plurality. Life is pluralia tantum, yes, as Bakhtin said, as art, as hero, as every human being is pluralia tantum.
Yeah, I see what you mean. That it's a social animal.
Yes.
Pretty much.
Yes.
I would like to thank Olga for her great presentation. I think her presentation is very important from the perspective that our yesterday discussion about a transition to a synthetic science. I think that Olga posed a very interesting question, that nowadays, yes, we can see a tendency toward unification of science, interconnectedness, but this unification occurs in very contradictory forms. And what we can see that this unification doesn't take into account different national traditions. For example, Russian tradition, German tradition, and French tradition. And we're talking about European traditions, but also what about the other parts of the world? What about Africa? What about South America? It seems as an attempt to unify science, to unify culture only on the base of a North Atlantic tradition. I think it is not a real, it is a false unification. It is not a real synthesis. This is a very important objection. and I think we have to talk seriously about this. This is my comment.
Thank you very much for this warm acceptance. Glad to meet you.